Kathleen Crank.
Hello. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you for staying around.
I'm sorry?
I said thank you for staying around.
I know it's getting late and we're all tired, but first of all, I just want to say I do deeply sympathize with this group of people that has testified before you today, and it really is sad, all the violence and all the threats and all the harassment that they have experienced because of, I guess, what I would consider a choice that they have made, but they might not consider it that way. I'd also like to say that they don't have a corner on that. Just many of you know, some of you don't, that since my daughter, my 14-year-old daughter, testified before this panel a couple of weeks ago in favor of traditional marriage, she has been the subject of an amazing amount of harassment, threats, death threats. An organization that she's associated with has been threatened, harassed, demands that she step down from her role that she's played. I just want to say there's a lot of hate out there, and it's not on our side for the most part. And I just really resent the characterization of those of us who are standing for traditional values and traditional morals as being characterized as bigots and haters. And I feel like this law does that. It basically says that anyone who might have a traditional view of gender or sexuality is basically becomes a bigot. And I just really, I'm really concerned about that, because people like my daughter are all of a sudden on the wrong side of the law. There's been calls for her to step down just because she has this belief, this traditional belief, and I just feel like that's really wrong. So that's just that, okay? On the other end, I just think creating a new civil right based on a behavior is a very major thing to do, and especially if it negatively impacts other civil rights. I mean, civil rights really need to be based on immutable characteristics that cannot be changed if they're not in the Constitution. And I really don't think there's been enough evidence presented here today that this is an immutable characteristic, an immutable condition that can't be changed. I know ex-transgender people. They do exist, and I know somebody, my friend has a person that comes into her medical office on Mondays and Wednesdays, will come in as a woman and demand to be called Michelle. Other days will come in as Michael and demand to be called Michael, and she's like, no, I'm going to call you Michelle. It forces people to treat people the way they want to be treated, not necessarily according with reason. I mean, for her to have to call him Michelle on Monday and Wednesdays and Michael on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I just think that's kind of defies common sense. So anyway, that's it.
Senator Raskin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony, and I'm sorry about what took place with your daughter. There were similar kinds of threats leveled against children who are members of this committee who supported the same-sex marriage call, and so I think we can all agree that people's children should not be victimized. And one of the things I found moving about the testimony today was the number of parents who came forward talking about the victimization of their children for being transgendered. But I'm curious about a few aspects of your testimony. One was you gave this example of the Michelle, Michael, and so on, and if you have further details about that situation, I'd be happy to share them with the committee. The legislation that we have defines gender identity as a persistent, bona fide gender-related identity. There's nothing in our legislation that would give anyone the right to show up at work on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays is one gender, and Tuesdays and Thursdays is another. So if you assume good faith in terms of this legislation, how do you feel about people making one switch, giving them one bite at the apple because they've been caught in the wrong body, if you credit the testimony of all the witnesses today?
I mean, my primary concern about this bill is the religious liberty aspect. The fact that if I and Joe go in to apply for a job, and neither one of us is hired, neither Joe or I are hired for the job, and we walk away and we look for another job, and we can't sue the employer. But if I and Joe transgender go and apply for the job, and neither of us gets the job, Joe transgender can sue, because he's now a specially protected class. I got you.
So basically we have a fundamental misunderstanding of how anti-discrimination law works then, right? Because you can't be discriminated against on the basis of race or sex or religion or ethnicity, national origin, or in this case, if we pass it, gender identity, doesn't give you a right to a job. It just means you can't be denied the right to a job for that reason only. So let's go back to your case of religion, because obviously you said you're concerned about religious discrimination. Do you think that it's appropriate that people can't discriminate on the basis of religion in employment? I mean, should someone be able to deny a job to someone because they're Catholic or they're Buddhist or they're Christian or Jewish?
Right, that one's in the Constitution.
Well, it's not in the Constitution that employers can't do it. So, but do you think it should be?
I don't know.
Well, it is in our law, and I thought a moment ago you said you were concerned about religious discrimination, and of course religion is not an immutable characteristic, is it?
I think religion is one of those things that's well established in our nation's history and tradition. The First Amendment, freedom of religious expression.
And that everybody has against the government, but you had testified that you said that anti-discrimination law should just apply to what you described as immutable characteristics, things that can't be changed about yourself. But our law applies it to religion too. So anyway, it's something to think about going forward. Now, of course, the witnesses we saw before said that they were dealing with an immutable reality. These kids were suicidal, saying they would do anything in their power to change this deeply agonizing psychological reality, but they couldn't. That to me sounds pretty immutable. But in any event, even on your definition, if it is something that's within the control of the person, so is religion. So that's just something you might think about in terms of anti-discrimination values.
Of course, there was a lot of concern about religious liberty with the bill that just got passed, same-sex marriage. That was a major concern on the part of a lot of
and we
constituents.
built every conceivable protection in the world into it. And if you have an example of how someone's religious liberty is trampled by that legislation, I would love to put it on my website.
That's another issue, so I
It is indeed, and you
won't
raised
keep
it.
the committee any further.
Thank
so
you for your
thank
testimony.
you.
Thank you very much.